Okay, now we have the second talk this morning entitled Issues and Trends in Scholarly Communications by the same mentor, Dr. H Kratoska. I'll give you the floor.
Thank you. This started off as issues and trends in academic publishing, but publishing is kind of broadened out, and so we tend to talk about scholarly communication. And first of all, let me talk a bit about scholarly publishing in Asia. Something remarkable has happened in the past 22 years. If you look at the origins of citable publications in Scopus, so going back to 1996, Asia was lagging way behind the US and way behind Europe. But around 2006, if you look at the figures, Asia pulled ahead of the US, and a few years later they pulled ahead of Europe. Now that's 2016. If you look at what's happened over the last 2 years, it's just a continuation of the same trend. The amount of publishing of academic material coming out of Asia is outstripping what's happening in Western Europe. It's outstripping what's happening in North America. If you look at the citable journal articles, you can also see where a lot of this is happening. It's happening in China. So in 1996, China was really just beginning a big push. And 22 years later, look at the size of the academic output coming from China. Now, every country, including Thailand, has had substantial increases. And pretty much the same thing across the board, social sciences and arts and humanities. But the volume of material compared to the overall volume of material remains pretty small. So what we're seeing in looking at academic publishing or scholarly communication is heavily shaped by what's happening in the STEM subjects, the science, the technology, the engineering, the math, and the medicine. This is also taken from Scopus. And what you're seeing here is the number of citable documents. Now, there's a certain number of documents that make their way into Scopus that are not citable, which means that they're miscellaneous papers that are not academic publications. So citable documents means the documents that are actual scholarly papers. And one of the interesting measures here is the percent of self-citations. And self-citations is simply where you've written a paper and you cite yourself. And for a while, they weren't singling that out, so it kind of inflated people's citation rates. But when you look at what's going on here, actually the self-citation rate for Thailand is quite low, very reasonable level. Philippines likewise. Indonesia right now, they're citing themselves a lot. And China, there's a fair amount of self-citation. The US, a little bit surprising, but about 50% of the citations are self-citation. Okay, let's look at publishing in East and Southeast Asia. There's actually a lot going on. There are around 300 university presses in East and Southeast Asia, including about 100, and I think 114 is the last figure I saw for China. There are also a number of commercial academic presses, that is, for-profit commercial presses that publish academic material. There are also an amazing number of academic journals. roughly 40,000. Most of these journals and most of the university press publications are Asian language. But there are a growing number of publications that are in English, and this is under some pressure from the universities to raise the international profile of the institution or to build links outside of the country. The articles that are published in these journals are primarily on local topics. In East Asia, they tend to be behind paywalls. But in Southeast Asia, a great many of these journals are open access. What is needed in both cases, and I guess particularly in Southeast Asia, is better finding aids. The problem with an open access journal compared to a subscription journal, if you subscribe to a journal, it comes to you. And you've paid for it, so you think, okay, I paid for it, I should read it. An open access journal, you have to go to it. And so if you don't go to it, you don't see it. So the problem for an open access journal is to attract people to come and look at what they've got. Let me just say something a bit about this question about articles on local topics. Somebody just raised the question during the break about an article that is very much a local article. And the question is, how do you interest readers in this article unless they're interested in that particular place and that particular topic? I'll use a different example. We did a workshop, or I did a workshop some years ago in Indonesia. And one of the participants had written a paper about a small village in West Java. The people in that village speak Sundanese, so the home language is Sundanese. And he was writing about what happens when children from that village start school, because school courses are taught in Indonesian, standard Indonesian, and not in Sundanese. So the question is, what happens to these students? How do they cope when they go into their classes? So, same question. How do you get people who are not interested in the Sundanese area or that particular village, how do you get them interested in reading that article? And the answer really seems to be fairly simple. What you want to do is write an article about the situation of a child who has one home language and a different school language. Now, that happens all over Indonesia because people's home languages are almost always not standard Indonesian. But it happens in a lot of other places. So you might not have any particular interest in West Java, but you might find that topic of what happens to a child or how do they cope with the fact that they're now studying in a different language than they used at home. You can apply that in so many places. And if you pitch your article that way, you can use the example from West Java, but you're explaining something that's a bigger issue, a bigger topic, and that's going to draw more readers. Another thing I think is needed is more intra-Asian communication. Let me just give you a couple of examples about that as well. It's easy, most anywhere in East or Southeast or South Asia, to find a farmer who is trying to survive on, say, a hectare of land. If you write a paper about a farmer, a case study of that farmer, and you send it to an American journal, they're primarily looking at an American audience. And what you do not find in North America is farmers with 1 hectare of land who are trying to just grow rice or whatever and survive. But everywhere, from Japan through Pakistan, you have that. So where is the audience for your paper? Fundamentally, it's an Asian audience much more than it is a Western audience. The problem is Asian journals are mostly being read in their country of origin. So if you write about a Thai farmer with a very small plot of land, how does that person survive? And you publish it in a Thai journal, probably it's going to be read in Thailand, but not outside. It will probably not be in a citation index. So from the standpoint of your department or your university, it won't count for much. Even if you're in a journal, an Asian journal that is in the citation index, it may not have a good impact factor. So the best papers that are being written in Southeast Asia or East Asia tend to go to international refereed journals. And why is that? Well, it's pretty simple. People are sending them there because the universities are telling them that's what you should do. So the situation right now is that if you are in Southeast Asia and you write an article, you send it off to a publisher, a journal that's based somewhere in the US or North America, or sorry, in Europe, and then that makes its way to East Asia, Northeast Asia. So if somebody in Korea reads your article, the chances are pretty good it's been filtered by an editor, by referees in North America. And if your topic is too local, there's a good chance it hasn't been published at all. Same thing is true of people in East Asia. If they're read in Southeast Asia, the chances are pretty good it's been filtered. Filter's the wrong word. It's been assessed in North America, and somebody's decided, yes, this is worth publishing. And it's even true within the region. So if you're in one Southeast Asian country, there's a pretty good chance if you're being read in another Southeast Asian country, it's gone through the same process, and likewise people in East and Northeast Asia. Now, I was director for a time of NUS Press, and we had relations with a number of other presses where we would occasionally co-publish a book. And these were ad hoc arrangements. So we would have a title we thought might be good in Hong Kong. So we would contact Hong Kong University Press, we'd work out an agreement for that one title, or Ateneo de Manila. And we'd have a Philippine title, we'd say to the director, would you like to co-publish this or publish a Philippine edition? And this works after a fashion. But it seems to me what we really need is a lot more interlinkages, regular connections within Southeast Asia and also between Southeast Asia and East Asia. I don't talk much about South Asia because there's a huge publishing industry there which chugs along very well on its own. So, but East and Southeast Asia, these leakages, I think, would be fairly simple to negotiate if somebody would just set about doing it. Okay, enough of the editorial. Now we come to a story. There is a big struggle going on within scholarly communication for dominance. So let's look at the basic situation. The producers of academic writing, which means you, me, scholars generally, do not make money from what we produce, which is very strange. I mean, if you were making handbags and selling handbags, you'd make some money off of it. But you're spending months, years doing your research, you write an article, and you send it off, and how much payment do you get back? Nothing. So we do not make money from what we produce. Secondly, the consumers of academic writing, which is us again, generally we don't pay for what we consume, which is, of course, generally a good thing. We don't pay because we're at a university, we go to the library, and lo and behold, there's all this material there. Nobody says you have to pay for it because the library is paid for it. So from an economic point of view, this is very strange. Not only that, publishing decisions the decisions I make as editor of a journal or as the director of a university press are not based on commercial prospects. I'll tell you a story. I was at the Frankfurt Book Fair one year, and if I'd had the money and the interest, I could have purchased the rights to one of the Harry Potter books. They were at the Frankfurt Book Fair, they were for sale. Allen and Unwin in Australia did buy it for the Australian market. And they discovered something wonderful. They discovered that if they sold Harry Potter books, they could make money. So they abandoned a book series that was put out by the Asian Studies Association of Australia. At NUS Press, we got that. So we got the series that made no money. Allen and Unwin started making lots of money. Now, historically, knowledge was not expensive. When I started off, I've been going through my bookshelves recently, looking at some older books. And a lot of the books that I bought, hardcover academic books, you look inside, there's a price of $5 US. I mean, even back in the day when the US dollar was worth more, that's not very much money. If you go down and you look at some of the books today, you're going to pay $150 US or $200 US. Well, I'm not going to pay it, actually, but that's what you would be asked to pay. So in the past, it really was not expensive to find information. Today, the price is very high. And this really is the heart of this kind of struggle that I'm talking about. So there are competing models for academic publishing. First, there's a not-for-profit model. And this was the kind of thing that was done by learned societies, and still is to some extent. The Siam Society, the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society, the École Française, and then the KITLV. Similarly, university presses are generally not-for-profit. Now, that doesn't mean we don't make some money, because we have to have money to operate on. But we're not out seeking profits. And then research institutes also do publication. And again, they're not for profit. The second model is for profit. And this is the commercial academic publishers. And the third model is open access, which basically, for the reader, is free. There's some complications behind the scenes, which I'll get into, but these are the three basic models that are competing for dominance in academic or scholarly communication. Now, there's some alternatives, places where people go and put their articles, put their writing up, and exchange information with other people. Repositories, university repositories. You can put your article there. It's available usually to anybody who finds it. There are preprint and postprint servers. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And then there are social networking platforms. So you don't actually have to publish through these three channels I mentioned above. The problem is you won't get any credit for it from your university unless you publish in one of the established channels. So first of all, the university press. The university press is a feature of research universities. The first one was created at Johns Hopkins University Press. It was the first university to call itself a research institution, a research university. That's in 1876, and 2 years later they created Johns Hopkins University Press. The reason was simple. The assumption was academic research has no market. No commercial press is going to want it. But if you do academic research and it's not published, it's useless. I mean, the whole point of it is that you discover something, other people have to know about it. So if the commercial presses are not going to publish this material, what's the option? Well, the option is a university press. So they were followed in 1886 by Waseda in Tokyo. And then in 1891, the University of Chicago was set up, and it had 3 divisions, one of which was the University of Chicago Press. They were followed by California, Columbia, Princeton, and so on, other places that declared themselves research universities. And by the early 2000s, there were around 1,000 university presses in English. I'm not talking about the Spanish-speaking world, where there are a lot more. And university presses primarily are publishing monographs. This is a slightly old set of figures, and I gather that's not coming out very clearly. When I put this together, there was something I found that said there were 7 university presses in Thailand. I'm not sure that's correct now, but Wachula, Thammasat, Chiang Mai, can't remember, I found at least 5. So overall in East and Southeast Asia, you've got around 300. Most of them were created between 1950 and 2000, and there was a big surge actually toward the end of the 20th century. In Southeast Asia, most of the major universities have a press. Most of them today are in trouble because, generally speaking, anywhere in Asia and North America, if you try to survive publishing monographs, you're not going to get enough money to keep going. Even the big North American university presses lose money on monographs. And that's the basic thing that university presses do. The presses that are successful are ones that do something in addition to publishing books. So Johns Hopkins University Press runs something called Project Muse. What Project Muse does is to help small presses get their material online. So the press I worked for, NUS Press, puts a journal online through Project Muse. I'm currently editing the Journal of the Malaysian branch of the Royal Asiatic Society. We're on Project Muse. Project Muse then puts together a package, it sells it to libraries. They cover their costs out of that, and whatever money is left over goes to the different journals. So they have a business that's outside of their own publishing. University of Chicago Press has something called BiblioVault, which is where other publishers can store their electronic material and put it out through print on demand. And they also have the Chicago Distribution Center, which is where they distribute books on behalf of other smaller university presses. And so they make money from that, and that money can support the university's publishing. In Southeast Asia, most of the books coming out of the university presses, with the exception of NUS Press, are in national languages. So the primarily English language publishers are NUS Press and Hong Kong University Press. And Hong Kong right now is kind of wavering on how much Chinese and how much English language publishing they should do. There's English language publishing in the Philippines. Most of it is for distribution in the Philippines. Then we come to commercial academic publishing. This has a long history, because if you go back to the famous early publications, Isaac Newton and so on, these were privately published, but they were commercial. Somebody had to buy them. You come to the 19th century, and famous publications like The Origin of Species was published by John Murray. Wallace's Malay Archipelago was published by Macmillan. So these are commercial publications. After 1950, there were a lot of these small commercial presses around, and they went through a whole series of mergers and acquisitions and consolidations. And what emerges from that are a certain small number of presses. and they acquired a lot of journals. And they are charging extremely high prices for subscriptions to these journals and for monographs. Now again, when I started out, I subscribed to several journals, and I'd pay $15 a year, $20 a year. If I wanted to subscribe to those journals today, I would pay about $1,500 or $2,000 for a personal subscription. And hardly anyone's going to do that because the publisher doesn't care. They're not looking for the individual subscription. They're looking for library subscriptions. So the big five that emerged from this process are Elsevier, Springer, which is now Springer Nature. Why is it Springer Nature? Because Springer acquired Nature publications. Taylor and Francis, which is Routledge, and others. Wiley and the American Chemical Society. Now, there's a big issue with commercial academic publishing. I've hinted about this before, but fundamentally what it comes down to is the universities, one way or another, are paying for people to do research. They're paying the salary of the researchers. You get a research grant because you're at a university, but you're providing the article to the journal for free. The editor of the journal, the referees who look at the article, probably are working for free as well. Sometimes now the authors are having to pay a fee to the journal in order to publish or even to get their article processed. So the journal comes out, the university then buys the information back that they paid for in the first place, and they buy it back at a very high price. The most expensive journals, these of course are in things like physics and medicine, are more than $20,000 per year for a subscription. And the commercial presses are making very, very large profits. So Elsevier is the biggest. They have around 2,600 journals. The revenues earned by Elsevier in 2018 were over 3.3 billion US dollars. But more importantly, the profit margin was 40%. Now, if you go into business, if you can get a profit margin of 40%, you are doing really, really well. That's only part, though, of a group that is called RELX. Elsevier, Routledge is part of the RELX group, but these groups are doing data analysis. And so the reason that there's so much money is to do with data analysis. It's not, and why does anybody want to have the control over a lot of journals? It's not so much the content, it's finding out what people are doing research on, being able to analyze the data and use the analysis of that data. So what trends are we seeing in academic publishing? Well, the big thing, of course, is digital publishing, or e-books. And over the past 10 or 15 years, university libraries have started demanding that university presses supply them with digital copies of books, supply them with e-books. Now, for the commercial academic presses, this isn't a great problem because they have enough resources and they will turn around and set up a platform where they can supply e-books. For a small university press, it is a big problem because they don't have the resources to set up and run a digital publishing platform. The high prices that are charged by the commercial academic presses have now given rise to an open access movement, which is saying, okay, we're just going to forget about this whole publishing operation as it exists. We're going to create a new way to distribute articles, and they're going to be free. Now, as most of you, I think, know, there are two basic variations on open access. One is green open access. And this is mainly institutional repositories. It can be personal websites. But fundamentally, if you put your money in or put your article into one of these places, you don't have to pay anything. Then there's gold open access. And gold open access is where a publisher is putting out a journal as before, but they're charging an article processing charge. And so if you want your article to be open access, you can have that if you pay. There's standard peer review, and the article processing charges range anywhere from $500 to about $5,000 US. So just take a Cambridge journal. And if you want to publish an article in a journal produced by Cambridge University Press, and you want it to be open access, the charge is around $2,800 US. The editors of these journals tell me that they really don't get very many people, or they get nobody, asking for this. But Cambridge makes the option available. The best comment I've seen about this, somebody said, long used to receiving little or no remuneration for their published work, scholars in the humanities are now asked to pay to give it away. There's a problem with article processing charges apart from the fact that they're too expensive, and that is they really don't cover the cost. So there was a study done back in 2007 of humanities and social science journals, and they figured out what does it cost to publish an article. The average length of an article was 19 pages. The average cost per page was $526 US. This is for North American journals. So the average cost per article was nearly $10,000. So if you were really going to support open access publishing by article processing charges, you'd have to charge each person around $10,000. Okay, let me just run through quickly how the open access movement took shape, because it's actually very recent. Fundamentally, I think you could date it from 1998, when the Association of Research Libraries established something called SPARC, which is the Scholarly Publishing and Academic Resources Coalition. They had member institutions in North America, in Europe, in Japan, China, and Australia. 4 years later, the Budapest Open Access Initiative called for free and unrestricted online availability of scholarly research through self-archiving and open access journals. 2013, you get a big shift in the direction of open access, because in the United States, United Kingdom, the EU, and Australia, the governments announced that publicly funded research must be available as open access. In 2015, the 12th Berlin Open Access Conference called for studies to be done for analysis and promotion of open access. And their concept of this is, you look at the amount of money that libraries are spending on subscriptions to journals. So suppose you take that amount of money and use it to fund open access publishing. It seems like it should be enough. In 2018, a group of funding organizations in Europe called Science Europe formed a consortium, which they called Coalition S. This is one of these clever things that I'm telling you, you probably shouldn't be doing. But you see, the second and third letters of coalition are OA, OA, open access. So Coalition S introduced something called Plan S. And the idea of Plan S is simple. all research should be in fully open access journals, and it must be made open access immediately. That fees are capped and paid by funders or by universities and not paid by individuals. And then last year, 2019, you're seeing Germany and Sweden and many individual universities canceling their Elsevier subscription packages. Now, some of those journals in the subscription package offered by Elsevier they still want, but they're now subscribing to these journals individually instead of as part of a big package. And at the same time, you're seeing new publishing models taking shape. So in Germany, for example, there has been the recent creation of a number of university presses, and you think, who in their right mind, given the situation of university presses, who in their right mind is going to start a new university press? Well, these are different sorts of presses. There's a working group in Germany that has about 33 members. 30 of them are operating under this new model. They're averaging about 44 titles per year. They do short print runs. And fundamentally what happens is, for any book, you need a PDF. The PDF can be printed as a book. It can also be put up online. So you say, okay, we've got this book. We're going to make it available online. If you want a hard copy, you contact us, and we'll print it off and send it to you. So it's a short print run. They make the online version available for free, and they're also departing from the tradition that had taken shape of publishing a lot in English. They're now publishing material in German. Well, this is very damaging, very dangerous to the commercial academic presses. So are they just going to sit still and say, well, okay, we give up? Of course not. So they have created something called Read and Publish. And basically the way this works, you have a company like, let's say, Elsevier, and they can go to a university consortium like University of California has. And so what they'll say is, look, you're subscribing to our big package of journals, and you're paying a lot of money. We understand that. So we're going to include in our package also a bunch of open access journals. And here's the deal. You continue to buy our package, and anybody at your university or in this university system can publish open access with us for free in our journals. You don't pay the article processing charge. Well, of course, what's really happening is that the subscriptions are covering the cost of the open access journal. Okay, well, open access has also given rise to a number of interesting phenomena. One of them is preprint and postprint servers. So preprints are manuscripts that have not been refereed. So you've written an article, you're ready to send it off for publication. But first you put it up on a preprint server. And what this means is that anybody can read it, comment on it. It's like what people used to do when they would take their manuscript, send copies off to 10 or 12 people and say, you know, here's my article, comment on it, let me know what you think of it. Only now you put it on a preprint server and you've got a much bigger pool of people who might look at it, who might comment. Now initially these were mostly in the sciences, but you're starting to get them also in the social sciences and humanities. And I listed a few right there. Then there are postprints. And a postprint is the final version of the manuscript after it's been refereed and after you have rewritten it, but just before it's published. So this will actually be the same as the published version, except it will not follow the layout that the journal is going to use. So it's difficult to cite it. You can get the information, but if somebody's going to cite this, they need to cite the version of record and not the final manuscript. So the version of record Many articles have multiple versions, and often they're online, because authors circulate drafts, they place preprints on preprint servers or postprints. They may do this in an online repository, a postprint server, on a personal web page. But the version of record is the one that counts. It's the one that has been laid out by the publisher. It's the version as published. And so you need the page number that comes from the version of record. Normally, the version of record is the one the publisher controls. They have the rights because you sign an agreement when you publish the article. It's the version that the university you work for will use when it evaluates your output. It's also the version that's used to calculate the impact factor, the H index, which is a measure of your productivity as an individual scholar. So the version of record is important, and that's the one that you should not, cannot circulate on your own. Okay, then you have social networking platforms. The big ones are Academia EDU and ResearchGate. Now there's a problem with these two, because as I said earlier, the publisher, when you publish an article, asks you to sign an agreement, and that agreement is about the copyright. Now some people get hold of a copy of their article, the version of record, and they upload it to Academia EDU or to ResearchGate. These violate the agreement that you've signed with your publisher. Elsevier has been fighting this for years. They've issued takedown notices to both of these, both to ResearchGate and Academia EDU. University presses ask authors not to repost articles there. So in 2018, the American Chemical Society and Elsevier charged ResearchGate with massive copyright violations. But at the same time, ResearchGate was in discussions with Springer, with Cambridge, and with a couple of other publishers, one they're listed there, to try to legitimize what they're doing. In other words, to find a way to work together so that ResearchGate could post articles without violating copyright. So these discussions, so far as I know, are still ongoing. But what you need to understand about these platforms, when you sign up for them, I won't ask how many people have done this, but I suspect people here have. When you sign up, you sign an agreement. And it's one of these long agreements, lots of small type. I mean, who reads those things, right? Well, if you read it, what you'll discover is that one of the provisions is that you grant Academia EDU, quote, a worldwide license to reproduce prepared derivative works based upon, distribute, and otherwise use your member content. In other words, you've given away your material. You also assert that anything you upload is something that you own, and that you are not infringing the intellectual property rights of others. Now you are, because you've signed an agreement with the publisher. So when you do this, you have actually broken the law. Now, generally speaking, nothing's going to happen. But you also agree to indemnify Academia EDU if there is ever a legal action taken against them. So basically, if somebody ever sued Academia EDU for copyright violation, they would simply say, well, we didn't do it, the author did it. And so if there's a penalty, they don't pay, you pay. Now there are some other social media sources that are trying to compete, legitimate ones, and they're trying not to violate copyright. Zenodo, which will put data sets, research software, research reports, and so on online. The Humanities Commons, which is Modern Language Association. They will post professional profiles, host discussion groups, develop publications, and so on. But they're not putting up the articles. So the ones that are putting up the articles are basically Academia EDU and ResearchGate. Then there is Sherpa Romeo. If you want to know what the policies are for any journal about copyright, about open access, about self-archiving, if you go to the websites that are run by Sherpa Romeo, it will give you the policies for individual journals. And then there are mega journals. Mega journals, the first one was put out by the Public Library of Science, established in 2006. They publish around 30,000 articles per year. And these articles are only refereed to a limited extent. They have a policy of publish first, judge later. So basically, they will accept any paper or publish any paper that is judged to be technically sound. They do have an article processing charge of $1,495 per article. Now you might be curious, 30,000 articles, $1,495 per article. So I calculated what does that come to? And it comes to a lot of money. If you multiply that out, you get 44 million US dollars. Now, in fact, they give certain discounts. So in 2017, they actually collected $35 million, which is quite a lot of money. The problem they're facing is that their expenses in that year exceeded 38 million. So they didn't actually cover their costs. They lost $3 million. So it was a business model that a lot of people liked, and several publishers started up their own mega journals. Springer had one, and they shut it down because it just wasn't working for them. Then there are bogus publications. And these you really need to watch out for, because there are a lot of them around. They're sending out emails all the time saying, oh, you send us your manuscript. Not only send us anything, your dissertation. We'll be glad to publish it. We'll do it quickly. And all you've got to do is pay us some money. So they tend to look, at least online, like genuine scholarly journals. They often have impressive titles. They are claiming that they're included in prestigious citation indexes and that they have high impact factors. Well, let me give you an example of how this works. I was approached by a Japanese author who had been invited by one of these journals. And he said, is this a legitimate journal? And he gave me the name. I looked it up and I found an address. It was a very, very nice address. It was on Park Avenue in New York City. And if you know anything about New York City, you know Park Avenue is really, really prestigious. So I looked up that address. And what did I find there? A photocopy shop that also offered mailboxes. So that this journal had hired a mailbox at this photocopy service shop, and that was their address. So I thought, okay, let me see who the editor is and what the fees are. Well, the fee I found right away, and then there was a little note that said, the managing editor can waive the fee. So I thought, who's the managing editor? So I go down, 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 long way down until you've come to the editor's positions. And what it said was, managing editor vacant. A lot of these journals, if you read the webpage, you'll discover first of all, the language on the webpage is ungrammatical. You can't find out who the editors are. So you have, well, there's an International Journal of Humanities and Social Science. There's an International Journal of Social Science and Humanities. There's an International Review of Social Science and Humanities, and on and on and on. So if you are approached by somebody, you want to pay attention to whether this is a legitimate journal or not. Because the thing to be careful of, these journals, like any other journal, will ask you to sign an agreement. And again, it's going to be a lot of small type. But somewhere in that small type, you promise that you will pay them a certain amount of money. This is a contract. They can enforce it. So if you sign this agreement, you have to pay them. So you need to be careful with this. How do you avoid them? Well, the first thing you do is you look at the directory of open access publications and find out if the journal is listed. You find out who the publisher is, and you find out if they're a member of the Open Access Scholarly Publishers Association. And then there is a website called Think, Check, Submit. And if you go to that website, it gives you a lot of advice about how to figure out whether a journal is legitimate or not. If your university subscribes to something called Cable's Scholarly Analytics, it also has lists of good journals and bad journals. But this is a paid subscription. You won't find it online. It has to be through the university. Okay, then let's talk a little bit about citation indexes, which have become extremely important. You know, back, again, when I was starting out, I remember reading somewhere that there were people going through the print journals and writing down all the citations. So figuring out this article, okay, we got a footnote to this other journal, and recording all this. I thought at the time this was one of the stupidest things I could imagine, is sitting down and trying to record the citations. And boy, was I wrong, because it has become a very big business. The citation indexes record when articles are cited in other journals. And the journal impact factor will be based on the citations of articles in other journals, fundamentally over a 2-year period. And it's a very simple calculation, the number of citations divided by the number of articles. So if you have a 0.5, it means that half of the articles have been cited. If you have above 1, it means that every article has been cited, and sometimes more than one, except it doesn't quite mean that. What it means is that the total number of citations for the journal is more than the number of articles. But sometimes what happens is that you have one article that gets a lot of citations and the others don't. Fundamentally, there's something really flawed about this, because a 2-year period is not enough, especially in the humanities and social sciences, for journals, articles to accumulate citations. So a 5-year impact factor would be much more accurate. But a lot of universities, they want a quick answer, so they use the 2-year impact factor. The other problem for humanities and social sciences is that the impact factors haven't taken into consideration books. This is starting to change, because with an e-book, you can calculate the citations in the same way you have with journals. You can track monographs and edited volumes just as if they were journals, because they're online. Now, there are 2 principal citation indexes. The Clarivate Analytics Citation Index, which is the Social Science Citation Index, Science Citation Index, Arts and Humanities Citation Index, and they have a new one called Emerging Sources Citation Index. And then there's Scopus, which is run by Elsevier. As of 2015, the Times Higher Education and the QS University rankings switched from the SSCI and so on to Scopus, when they were evaluating the research output of universities for the International University Rankings. Now, this was really awkward for Clarivate Analytics because they started off saying, we're not going to cover everything. We're going to be selective. And the whole notion that underlies this, going back to when it started, was that if you look at any field, any academic field, most of the citations are going to appear in a fairly small number of journals. So the idea was, if you look at what's going on in that small set of journals, you can figure out the trends in the field. You don't have to survey every journal in that field. So that was the basis of the original citation indexes. Scopus then cast a much broader net. So at one point, what you had happening was that Scopus had 20-some thousand journals, and Clarivate Analytics had about 12,000 journals, and they were losing out. So what did they do? They created Emerging Sources Citation Index. They added a whole bunch of journals until their number of journals that were being covered pretty much matched what was coming out in Scopus. Well, a lot of complaints have been made about impact factors. And some of the points that are raised, one article with a whole lot of citations can distort the results. Many articles in journals that have high impact factors are never cited. Around 50% of the articles in a journal with high impact factor don't get citations. A lot of the others get one citation, and then a few of the articles get a whole lot of citations. Scholars have learned how to game the system. So they'll agree they'll quote each other's work. Or they'll put multiple authors on a single article. Now, if you co-authored an article, you have 2 authors, 3 authors, that's fine. Some of those articles in the Sciences list 20 or 30 authors. And these are all the people who signed on to the research grant. Also, a lot of people will cite articles they haven't really used just to give somebody else the citation. And of course, in the humanities and social sciences, citations come much more slowly than in the sciences. So in my university, and I'm sure a lot of others, the university administration is always saying, what's wrong with you people in the humanities? You don't get any citations. Look at the sciences. Look what their impact factors are. They're so high. Well, of course, the people running the university come from the sciences. Okay, there are also alternative measures of impact. So there's the H index, which measures the impact of an individual scholar. So how many times an individual is cited in other publications. There are weighted citations, which are based on the importance of a journal or of an article or of an author. Or they're just simply counting. So how many views and downloads does an article get? How many mentions are there on social media? Or how many times is an article bookmarked? Sorry, and then at the bottom of the screen you see a web page, www.altmetric.com. If you want to know more about this, you can go there and find discussions of alternative ways of measuring impact. And finally, there are a number of other types of citation indexes emerging. In ASEAN, there are a number of national indexes. China, Korea, the same. Well, my voice is wearing out, and I am out of things to say, so thank you very much.
Well, we can handle some questions. Do you have any questions or comments? Okay, so
give them a minute or two to gather their thoughts.
Okay.
Okay, thoughts are gathered. They don't have any.
So thank you very much, Dr. Paul Katroska, and thank you all the participants for your attention today. We will, you can follow up we have video streaming, and we'll publish it on the on the Facebook page of Office of Research Affairs. You can, if you missed the beginning part of the lectures, you can go back to the page and rewatch the whole lectures. So for workshop participants who are going to be with us in the afternoon, the building is it's the research building, not very far from here. You can walk with our staff, and lunch is prepared for workshop participants at that building. And for the rest of the participants, thank you for your attention, and hope to see you in the next events organized by Office of Research Affairs.